Good afternoon, everyone. We just want to thank you so much for joining us today. We're really happy to have you here for our Ask an Auditor Anything live Q&A session. You're in for a real treat as we get to tap into our experts and answer your burning compliance and audit questions. So at KP or Kirkpatrick Price, our goal is to educate, empower, and inspire our clients to greater levels of assurance. And we hope this webinar helps you prepare to face the threats and impacts to your business today. So my name is Jen Peters. I'm the Director of Audit Delivery at Kirkpatrick Price, and I will be your host for today's session. So a few housekeeping items before we get started, and I introduce you to our panel. All attendees are muted, but during this Q&A, we will be discussing the questions that were previously submitted. If you do have a question that you would like answered, please feel free to put it in the chat, and if we have time, I'll try to get to it and see if we can get your question answered. Additionally, if you would like to have a CPE credit for this webinar, please email hello@kirkpatrickprice.com and we'll happily send you a CPE certificate. And finally, this session is being recorded, and attendees, you will receive a live link in your inbox tomorrow. All right, so just at Kirkpatrick Price, we know that when it comes to threats, you want to make sure you're ready. And in order to do that, you need quality cybersecurity and compliance audit reports with results that you can trust. The problem is audits are hard because the process is complicated and can feel overwhelming. But we believe if you're going to do it, the audit should be worth it. We have been in your shoes and we know how hard audits can be, but we've issued over 10,000 reports to 1,200 clients worldwide, giving them the assurance they deserve. We would like to encourage you to connect with us on social media and subscribe to our monthly newsletter, The Readiness Report, so we can partner with you to help you meet your challenging compliance goals. And with that, I'm happy to introduce to you your speakers today. Up first, we have Mr. Stephen Collins. Stephen has worked in the information security and auditing space for 20 years. He has experience across a variety of disciplines with extensive work in the healthcare industry. Stephen enjoys helping customers and follow best practices to ensure their environments and collected data are secure. He looks forward to engaging with interested individuals on a variety of information technology, risk, compliance, privacy, and security related topics. He holds several certifications, as you can see on the screen. And next we have Mr. Bob Welch. Bob is a security professional with over 30 years of experience in leadership roles with both large and small organizations. He currently holds a CISSP and CISA certifications and has decades of experience in the accounting industry, serving in various technology roles, including security operations, network management, and server administration. Bob also has many years of working in information technology, risk, and compliance. He also looks forward to helping clients expand their knowledge in their security endeavors. And with that, we will jump into our Q&A. We are very excited to have everybody here. We got some great questions. And so I'm gonna just work through these questions, and hopefully you guys can put some more in the chat. But first and foremost, one of the first questions we have is, what are the biggest challenges that you've seen emerge for your clients over the past year? And so we are now almost 6 months into the year. So I'm gonna start off with Stephen. You're 6 months into this year. What challenges are you seeing now, that you're seeing consistently with your clients?
Yeah, I think there's two real challenges I think people are facing right now. And one is obviously a continuation of everybody moving everything into the cloud. And I think what people are seeing is that as they move things into the cloud, they tend to think, okay, I've put everything in the cloud, I'm safe, I'm secure, it's somebody else's responsibility. And I think people don't realize that that's not actually true. Just because you move it into either, Azure, AWS, Google, that they are responsible for everything, when in fact it's not. There's a matrix that exists that explains what you're responsible for throughout all of that. And so I think people really need to take the time to look at that, because that is really biting a lot of people on that one. Unfortunately, they put stuff out there and then they don't realize that, oh, hey, I'm actually the one who has to secure my database or secure my data warehouse or whatever it may be. And I think the other big one is something we'll touch on later, but it's definitely going to be like ChatGPT and AI with, okay, so how do I prevent my people from being able to use this? Or how do I make sure that I integrate this inside of my business in a way that allows my data to remain secure, but still allows me to take advantage of some of these higher level machine learning systems?
Great. I'm looking forward to that discussion. And so that's a prelude to everybody. We are going to talk about AI and ChatGPT today. So I'm really looking forward to that. But first, we're going to get through some of our core questions. So Bob, I want to turn it over to you because you guys you and Stephen have a different clients. And what are you seeing with the clients that you've been interacting with so far this year?
So what I've seen recently, and this is comparing from 1 year to the next, is there have been a lot of companies now that are short-staffed. I'm seeing a lot of layoffs out there. There's at least 2 that I know of that have had significant layoffs, close to almost cutting to the bone. And the first thing that gets cut typically is somebody on the security team, somebody in IT. You know, they're trying to consolidate everything, and then there's which ties into the next thing that I see a challenge is that the risk analysis and risk assessment process typically is harmed during that scenario. When you're shorthanded, the last thing you're going to want to do is evaluate your vendors or take a look at your risks and everything, because at that particular moment you're still trying to keep the lights on. So that's what I've seen recently as the biggest challenge, basically the business environment.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Stephen. And that really gets us into our next question, is about how do we promote a culture of compliance within an organization?
Yeah, promoting a culture of compliance is something that needs to start top down. Your CEO, president, head of the board, whatever it may be, really needs to be the one to champion that and push that at the highest level and let everybody know we do compliance for a reason, we do security for a reason, we do privacy for a reason, and to instill in people not just one way, but within training, with emails, with all of the different methods that you communicate to your employees. You need to be telling them, look, this is not optional. You don't get to choose whether or not you want to be compliant with something. This is mandatory for the organization. But you also have to let the people know why. Like, what is it that we're doing that's so important to being within compliance, whether it's GDPR, whether it's CCPA, whether it's any number of laws or regulations throughout the world for that.
Bob, do you have anything to add?
I just wanted to highlight, he hit the nail on the head pretty much. Basically, it's like the why is the part that I wanted to make sure it was focused, because if they don't understand the reasoning behind it and what the consequences are for lack of compliance and not following policies and stuff, it's going to make it very hard to create a culture around that. So that was a very good answer, though.
All right, and we're going to approach this same question a little bit later in the view of emerging technologies and being excited about that. So I'm going to put a pin in it for right now. I don't want to give it away. But so this next question centers on really how organizations, and Bob, I'll let you answer this one, is how does an organization stay on top of all the frameworks, right? You can't, you could, I guess, be compliant. You could do every framework, right, if it was applicable, but how do they stay on top of the frameworks that are relevant to their business and organization?
Well, I hate to be like doing a shameless plug, but you got to kind of you got to do the audits, and you have to do them regularly. And those audits will tell you where your shortfalls are. And the biggest thing to remember about an audit is that it is an opinion about what an auditor sees in your environment, right? It is a good way to help prioritize your spending on that sort of thing. So if you get an audit and you see some shortcomings in the letter to management, or just maybe an exception that had come up, this will help guide some of the spending. And maybe you don't need that fancy new, on-prem firewall if you're only doing, just internet access in the office. Maybe you might need to spend that on something, on something different. So that is the challenge of like kind of staying on top of the frameworks. The other thing is you got to understand what regulatory environment you're running in, because there might be some frameworks that you have to do. So if you do any government contracting, you're definitely going to want to be into NIST RMF because you might need to get authority to operate or anything like that. These are all things that will help you determine what frameworks that you need to at least acknowledge.
Awesome, thanks, Bob. Stephen, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I think that anymore, with as complicated as a lot of these frameworks have become, whether it's SOC, whether it's ISO, PCI, GDPR, what I'm seeing and what I think now is that you really need a dedicated compliance person, whether it's an analyst, whether it's an engineer, a manager, whomever it is, that's responsible for monitoring the various like trade publications as well as the official location where all of these get published, and monitoring for any time that there are changes. And then that person also has to be responsible for figuring out, okay, so we just had, PCI 3 over to PCI 4. What are the changes? How does that impact my organization? Documenting all of that in a nice, easy to digest format and pushing that up to management to get them to understand that in the next year, the next 2 years, whatever it is, this is what we're going to be responsible for. So we're going to need to increase the budget here or buy this system or bring new people online, whatever it may be. But really it comes down to just having that dedicated person who's responsible for making sure that they're figuring this out and then communicating it all the way up through management.
And I know one more thing is having a good compliance partner like Kirkpatrick Price. So, and part of what you guys do, you guys are the experts and you provide that value to our customers to help them understand what their regulatory requirements are, frameworks, et cetera. So just shameless plug for KP, we can help you. We want to partner with you to cut through that complexity. All right, now on to one of my favorite topics. I'm very excited about this, is we're going to move into the topic of AI. We had quite a few questions come in about ChatGPT, but we do know there's really a plethora of, there's AI for anything, I think, out there now. But we're really going to look at this in terms of like the lens of compliance and auditing. And so first question, let's see, Stephen, you can answer this one. How are auditors addressing the use of ChatGPT by employees within organizations?
It's kind of cutting edge at this point. I think a lot of organizations haven't fully implemented it, or they're still trying to figure out how to implement it. And the one thing that I would say to caution everybody about is, if you look at the articles that are coming out and the people who have been using these algorithms extensively, what they're finding is that by using these, and if you put data in them, no matter what the company says, if like this ChatGPT, if they say, oh yeah, we don't disclose any of your confidential data, well, it's actually not true, because there have been workarounds found where people were able to see highly sensitive data submitted by an entirely other organization that they weren't supposed to, just because of the way that they were asking questions to the system. So people just need to understand that for the most part, anything you put in there is probably going to be visible to other people. So by using this like SaaS-based version of it, all of your questions, all of your answers, everything you give it is being used to train that model. And then all of that data becomes part of its data set, allows other people to query against it if they ask those right questions. So I think people really need to understand and tell their employees that, look, if we're going to use these things, here are the rules, here's the policy, here's how and why we're going to use them. Don't put sensitive data out there, things like that, as well as making sure that the data you get out of it is actually truthful. There was an article that got published, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, where a lawyer had submitted a brief to the court and he had used ChatGPT for it. And what the court found was that every one of the cases that he referenced in there was completely false. It had completely false documentation. It had false answers. It had false backing. It was something the court had never seen before. And so it's so important to validate that the output is actually correct. You can't just assume, hey, this thing's really smart, therefore it's going to give me the right answer. Well, no, you still have to actually go through and look at the data and make sure, yes, this is true, real, actual, factual data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard the same thing. I listened to a podcast and they were actually asking Bard, which is Google's version of AI, to pull up the latest articles on their YouTube page, and it was all completely cited wrong. And it was just really fascinating. It was they were reviewing this in real time. So it's that important, that trust but verify, what you guys are really called in to do. So Bob, what about you? How would you, what recommendations do you have, or how do you feel auditors are starting to address the use of ChatGPT in the workplace?
So it's very important to understand that this is a technology. It's not just one single product. ChatGPT, and I know we just said this because there's other versions of it out there, but GPT is actually that engine is produced by a company, or not even a company, it's an organization called OpenAI. So that technology is getting weaved into almost everything, and including criminals and things of that nature are using it to produce different things. So one of another example of a criminal usage of it is they used a AI to mimic somebody's daughter, son, or whatever it is, and try to basically call the person using their voice, their relative's voice, saying that they've been kidnapped and that they need a ransom. And this is just the tip of the iceberg right now. We're really just beginning to see this. The other thing I need to understand is, and this speaks to the accuracy of any of the AI that's out there right now, is that we use the term artificial intelligence. Okay, well, artificial intelligence is to intelligence pretty much the same way that artificial sweeteners are to sugar. They're very similar, but one of them's kind of not quite right. And artificial intelligence is exactly that. It's basically crawling around, finding the best answers for certain things. And a lot of these false cases and things of that nature are because it's trying to find correlate certain the main task, if you will, with the information that it has. And it sometimes tries to take some of that information and interpret it in a way that would fit in that scenario. So, and I'm not going to even pretend to know the code and the logic behind it and everything else, but I will say that validation of the data is always going to be you're going to need to read that. If that lawyer read that, validated those sources, he wouldn't have gotten in trouble. He got in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
He got in big trouble because that's exactly what you've got to be careful of. Is if you use AI, and this is really the biggest thing here. We're not talking about like the threats against you. Everybody wants to make AI sound like it's going to be, like Skynet from Terminator. It's not. It's what it is. It's integrating this technology into what you're doing right now, and ensuring that you're not going to be liable for any bad information that puts out.
Bob, you are actually headed into our next question, so we're going to jump. Yeah. You're like the perfect segue into it.
Okay.
So we had so we had one question that came in from one of our viewers. Said they asked, during an upcoming audit, will clients need to have a new policy in place to specifically address the usage of ChatGPT or AI?
Yes. I mean, as simply as I can put it, the answer is yes. And the reason is, you need to be able to tell your employees what is and is not acceptable. And that's kind of the whole point of a policy is, here's what we're doing and here's what's allowed to be done. So if you don't create that policy and you don't tell people, hey, here's the things that you can use it for, here's what to be aware of, all of that, and somebody goes out and does it, and for whatever reason, let's say they put a bunch of data in there and it all gets breached, well, you didn't tell that person that they weren't supposed to do that, and you didn't have anything that said, here are the acceptable uses, which kind of gives the employee a little bit of an out to say, well, you never told me I couldn't do that. It's not the best idea, but the whole idea is that we have a policy for everything that we are going to be using in the environment. And I think things like these chatbots are really no different in that regard.
The other thing is to clarify your existing policies, because if they're using an external AI system like GPT or Bard or I think what was it, Bing Answers, I think is what Microsoft's version of it is. If they are typing proprietary or confidential information into those, that is a breach of almost every single acceptable use policy out there or privacy policy that you have. So your existing policies will more than likely cover any use of external AI. Okay. Internally, however, if you have an accepted, AI tool that you're using, I think I would go back to making sure, making sure that you have something in the processing integrity piece of the trust services criteria. You want to make sure that the information that's coming out of that is accurate, and that's really what we look at in the audit. And we say, okay, you're using an AI to determine this information. How are you making sure that that information is accurate? Who's checking that, or how are you checking it? And do you have different metrics to be able to tell how accurate the information is that's coming out of that AI?
So Bob, if you were coming into a company that has a clause in their acceptable use policy for the use of ChatGPT, what would you, as an auditor, what would you be looking for? And how would you test it?
I would definitely be looking for anything mentioning usage of proprietary or internal only or confidential information in those platforms. I would say it's completely forbidden. You can't tell what's happening. I'll use an example that this had come up before. Grammarly. Grammarly, from the last time I checked, this has been a while, did not have any audit reports whatsoever. Their development was out of Ukraine. They had nothing that I can discern that would say give us any kind of information about their security. They wouldn't participate in any third-party due diligence. I said, then we can't use it, because we're basically, Grammarly is capturing that information. Grammarly's arguably an AI at this point, because it's trying to figure out what your grammar is and everything else. It's capturing that information, sending it to their servers, and then pushing it back out in the form of a revised sentence. And it's dangerous because it's got to look at the context, which is what you want an AI to do. You want to look at the context. That's the thing that right now a lot of the machine learning stuff couldn't do. Whereas if you're putting that information out there, you need to make sure that they know that you're not allowed to push anything out there because you have no agreement with ChatGPT. You have no agreement with using Google Bard. You don't have agreements in place, and if you don't have agreements, then things like confidentiality, any kind of privacy concerns that you might have, or even just them using the data for whatever they want to use it for. Maybe they'll plug it back into the pool of information and then you reuse it for somebody else, which might end up disclosing that information to a third party that you don't know. You're not going to know about that. So the biggest thing in a policy when it comes to external AI, ChatGPT, services, Grammarly is a big one that I would look at, is either if it's not an approved service, it's not approved for use at all. And to top that off, if you do decide to, hey, this would be a good tool to use internally, I would look at the contracts that you're signing with these companies, and I would have a contract in place to guarantee confidentiality and that they're not going to pass any of your information on to anybody else, like a mutual NDA, something of that sort, where they're not going to disclose anything. So I would wait until there's a like a commercial service for an AI before you allow anybody to use one in the firm or in your company.
Cool, thanks, Bob. Yeah, it's definitely, exciting, which leads me to kind of like, we answered this question earlier, but I want to look at it from a different angle is, we work with a lot of technologists, and technologists love technology, and anything that we can automate, anything that's emerging and cool and shiny, we want to put it in our system. But there's also the challenge, right, of the security piece. So what advice would you give management on balancing the use of emerging technology and desire to use emerging technologies that may be more efficient and automated with compliance and the importance that having a secure system brings?
I think that probably comes down to, at the highest possible level, something as simple as a risk assessment. I think that if you feel like you need to use that, first identify what's my use case that I actually truly need this for. And then based on that, I would do a risk assessment that says we want to use these new, kind of unproven, untested systems in the environment, and we want to use them for these reasons. This like X type of data is going to be involved, whether it's proprietary, confidential, or public information. And then I would have some sort of like overall risk score for it. Is it a high risk? Is it a critical risk? Is it a low risk? And then I'm going to make somebody in management sign off on that and say, we understand that there is either, there's a large risk associated with this. However, based on the business need that we have and what we're trying to do, we believe that trying to implement and test to be able to deploy a feature like this is worth the risk to the organization, and we are willing to accept that risk on behalf of the organization. So really, it kind of all comes down to me for just something as simple as a risk assessment.
Great. And if anybody on the call has not had a risk assessment, that is the service we offer. We have teams come out and help you build your risk assessment. They'll help you work through it, tabletop it, and all of that. So just want to throw that out there. So speaking of risk assessment, that kind of leads us into maybe like a conversation about not frameworks, but compliance and like regulations. And so we know that AI is new. But have you guys heard or want to suggest any ways that companies can maybe implement some compliance, or what have you heard of impending regulation regarding AI?
Go ahead, Bob.
So it's such a, the only thing that I know is that and I hadn't seen the details of this, but apparently they've snuck in some regulation with this new, and I haven't seen it yet because they haven't passed it. So, but there are some regulations that are coming down for AI, and it is being addressed here and there. I think what I'm looking at is the debt limit extension. Somewhere in there's something about AI. I saw a news clip about or something like that. What I would watch out for. So, unfortunately, the way things happen is usually there's like there's a Wild West period, right? And this has happened time and time again. There's a Wild West period where all bets are off. You can do anything you want to with this stuff, right? And people are. That's the reason why the lawyer that wrote his briefs, had ChatGPT write his briefs and do all these other things. That is kind of what's going on right now. And what's going to end up happening is that you're going to see some form of, there's going to be some sort of damage that's done. That's going to be some kind of impact that for risk, which is, I'm going to go back to, I don't know which side he's on. He's on this side for me. I'm going to go back to what Steven said. The risk assessment, I can't even stress this enough. If you put it in your risk assessment and put it in your risk register is what you use to track your risk, ongoing risk. And then you go to management, you have them accept that risk. You mitigate it the best that you can, and then you accept it. You might not have a choice but to accept it as is, because how are you going to mitigate it? You can mitigate it with policies, but that's still not going to necessarily stop it. So, but as far as regulation, I think we're going to see something fairly soon, because there's a lot of, what was that?
A lot of chatter. I feel like there's a lot of chatter right now. I've heard several different voices talking about what they could do, how can they, from the range of they can, they have to, versus how will they can't, no, they can't do it. But one of our chatters put in the chat box, NIST has released a kind of voluntary AI framework that you could put in best practices. So just want to shout that out. Thank you to whoever put that in there. So there is some guidance that we are seeing from some of our regulatory and best practice bodies, but nothing formal.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to throw that out there.
There's also the fact that kind of right now there's I'd say two big players. You've got the EU and you've got the United States. And unfortunately, something like this it came along and nobody was prepared for it. And so everybody is scrambling to try to figure out, how can we regulate these? How should we regulate these? And then ultimately, how will we regulate these? And I know that the EU is actually working on trying to figure out right now, okay, what should we actually be passing in order to regulate these? And what is it we're actually regulating under these? And it's the same with the United States, and Congress is working on that right now. But just because there's nothing specific to AI doesn't mean existing like confidentiality standards don't apply. It's really no different than having some other form of SaaS software you're using where you're entering data. The same kind of privacy and security and confidentiality agreements and rules all still apply. It's what we're waiting for are these specific things for AI from the various districts around the world.
Awesome, thanks. And that actually is great into our next topic. So when we think about the use of data, we think about data security, data privacy. So we had a question come in, and the question is this: how do startups, and Jennifer's going to insert, or enterprise clients need to think differently about data resilience and data residency requirements as they expand internationally?
So I would say, I think what they need to think about is the fact that there are different rules around the world, obviously. In the United States, for example, you've got HIPAA. Well, the EU doesn't really have anything like HIPAA. The Asian world doesn't really have anything like HIPAA. Africa doesn't really have anything like HIPAA. So as you start to expand out and you get this highly sensitive data that's being collected in various districts, you have to watch out and say, okay, what am I collecting? What are the rules surrounding where I'm collecting it? And what are the rules associated with transferring that across the borders and letting people in other countries access data from those other countries as well? There's all sorts of rules and regulations throughout the world about things like that. And then you get into, like, in the EU, you've got to keep people in the EU for being able to store the data, and they have to be able to like remove the data. And there's various other GDPR requirements. And a lot of that is now moving into like China, for example. They're now trying to make it so that the data will stay only within China, can only be accessed by like Chinese nationals. They can't be sent to American companies. And then America's doing the same thing. We're trying to keep all the data in the United States and trying to keep other people from accessing it. So really, for me, it's all about like jurisdiction and data jurisdiction as you expand into various other parts of the world.
Yeah, interestingly, I was on site with a client a few weeks ago, and they are actually doing a GDPR gap analysis because part of their strategic business plan is to expand their business into the EU. And so to do that, they do use a lot of data. They're cardholder and PI and PHI. So, what they did was they wanted to know before we break ground, before we really do this, what do we need to have in place? And so they participated in a gap analysis with our privacy team, and they've been working through looking at how quickly data needs to be removed from a data lake. How can they get it removed? Those are just some examples, but they really, look at all of those different things specific to that region, specific to the country. So just really want to highlight, we have an amazing privacy practice at Kirkpatrick Price, and our privacy team, it's a standalone part of our audit team, and they really dive in and they look at how you're handling this. We've done, I think in the first quarter of this year, maybe 16 different privacy frameworks, if my memory serves me right. So we have a really big breadth of knowledge, and really I would encourage people and clients, whether you're a startup or whether you're, a large enterprise organization, and you want to expand your footprint, is really get with a privacy professional to really understand what you're doing, because you would rather know on the front end and make sure your environments are secure versus getting to the back end and end up with fines. We see that all the time where we have, there's probably one today. But Bob, what about you? Do you have anything any advice you would give a startup or
I certainly do. So this is what I would say is, and this is what's also lacking when I go into some, first thing you got to do is you got to look at the contractual obligations that you have with your customers and your clients. So a lot of times they may specify that you can't cross any borders with their data, and as far as the contracts are concerned, the one thing I want to mention that this is, and KP's practice, privacy practice, is led by an attorney. Privacy is a legal issue. It's something that has legal consequences. It deals with regulation, it deals with laws, and you're going to, one thing that I will say, you don't want to go Google what you need to do for transnational transactions and things of that nature. You have to, I would go to an attorney and say, hey, especially one that is very well versed in privacy matters, particularly international, and make sure that you go and whatever you put in place is defensible legally. Because if you do something and you get sued, there goes, it could be very damaging depending on what laws and regulations you violate. So the biggest thing, and like I said, and shameless plug, but our privacy practice is led by an attorney, and there's a reason for that. That's because, and I believe 2 or 3 of the people that are working under him have worked at law firms and also that.
Yeah, they all have extensive practice in the various international, have started programs. So really, one more shout out for privacy team. They're excellent. They're very knowledgeable. They can help you navigate those questions. Highly recommend on the front end to do that before you start expansion plans. It'll save you some money.
Yeah, and then the other thing, having kind of worked with companies that have expanded to a lot of offshoring was going on probably about 10 years ago. It was going on to India, and to a lesser extent, South Africa of all places was another place. But many professional services firms were doing this 10 years ago. And the biggest thing is where the data lives. And, if you are, okay, so one way to do this is to do virtual desktops. You can have those virtual desktops based in the United States. All the data resides in the United States, and you can lock it down to where they can only see the data and work within that environment. Well, even though that's happening, that data is still being transferred over to another country. These are the details that you're going to have to figure out when you decide to expand internationally. That data, just because you've locked it down to where they can't do any screenshots, they can't print it out, they can't do anything else, the data still is going to another country, even though it's residing in the US or whichever country you decide to shore the data. So once again, the takeaway from this is consult, definitely you have an attorney in that process someplace.
Wise words, Bob. And you brought up something really interesting. When we think about when we use vendors or we are offshoring, right, we are transferring risk, right? That's what offshoring is transferring risk. But another risk that comes up, especially since we have come through the pandemic and now that we're, still navigating the work from home environment, I'm going to look at this 2 different ways. So what controls, and Stephen, I want you to answer the second part of this question. What controls and documents are necessary when we do have 100% remote workforce? So that's question 1. And then, Stephen, what I would like for you as our resident QSA on the call, how does it apply to the CDE and accessing CDE? So Bob, you take question 1, what controls and documents are necessary when it's 100% work from home or remote workforce? And Stephen, is there any difference when you have to access the CDE from a work from home environment? So Bob, lead us off.
All right, so when you have, and it's especially important for companies that, are 100% cloud-based. You need to make sure that there is, when they're remoting in, they're using a VPN, they're using multi-factor authentication, that preferably they're going to one location and not to one location with a site to site to another location. You want them to pretty much go as directly as possible to the VPN to where the data is and where they're working. The other thing is encryption of every single device that your data is going to go to. You need to make sure that everything that leaves, because if somebody loses a laptop and it's not encrypted, you have to prove what was on that laptop, and that's a breach. Okay, if you're not able to, if it's encrypted, that's a compensating control, but it's still, even being encrypted and everything else, it's still a breach if you lose that laptop. So you still need to make sure that everything's encrypted. You don't have anybody out there. You need to enforce strong passwords. I've seen a lot of companies that are relying on NIST minimums and an 8-character password, they're also saying now NIST is not is recommending that you don't have to have a password expiration. The one thing I'll say, and this has come up in a lot of audits, is if you use NIST minimums, that's not secure. If you're using the minimums, that's not secure. That's just what they're recommending as the minimums. But if you're doing it across the board, it's not secure. I don't believe it's secure, especially an 8-character password. That's absolutely not secure. So that being said, I think that take a look at how people remote in, make sure that you invest in that technology, make sure that everything is encrypted everywhere. And then use multi-factor authentication. The stronger that is, the better. One of the things that I think the default for one of the apps that we're using is now providing a number that we have to type in as validation for the multi-factor. So, strengthening that is the best way to go. So I'll pass that on.
All right, so Stephen, you get to approach this from the point of view as a QSA, and so what controls and documents would need to be in place for someone working from home wanting to access the CDE? And for those of you who don't know what CDE is, cardholder data environment. So this is for any companies that process, well, I'm not the QSA on the call, so I'm gonna let our QSA educate everybody.
Yeah, thank you. So you're right. It is the cardholder data environment, and essentially what it is it's the scope of your PCI assessment. It's the systems that you're using in order to be able to provide your services under that PCI DSS framework. Now, working from home, it can offer some additional challenges. And I think for me, what I'm looking for is I want all of the same controls applied to those laptops or those workstations if they're desktops, because I want to make sure that if those laptops end up becoming in scope for your CDE, that we are making sure that we don't have a different rule set for those that we would for like a server or something sitting in the office. So I want to make sure it's got AV. I want to make sure it's being patched regularly. I want to make sure it's being vulnerability scanned, that it's being centrally managed. I want to make sure that they're not local admins on the machines. And I think one of the most important ones is I want to make sure that they are not allowed to download data from a server inside of your CDE down to their local machine. We want to make sure that that data can't end up down there, because then you've got a whole nother device that you have to try and figure out, if something happens to it, what was on it, like Bob was talking about. So I think it's really important to make sure that all the communications between your end user and whatever like your bastion host is to get into your CDE, all of that is secured. You're using proper passwords, proper timeouts, a VPN, multi-factor authentication, kind of all the standard controls that I would want if it wasn't a CDE, but I still want to see those applied with what it is with the CDE.
And I have one I want to add. You would need to make sure that you have a good policy, a good work from home policy. So just thought Bob and I have this conversation a lot. So I just want to, he's educated me. And if it's in your policy, then that's what's followed, and that's what an auditor will come and look at. So moving on to our next question, and I'm just looking at our time, and I want to make sure that we have some extra questions that came in that I want to get to. But so Stephen, as a PCI auditor, there's definitely different challenges and requirements for our PCI audits. So this question is regarding, and this is not PCI specific, but I want to look at it through that lens. How critical are the results of internal testing to auditors, and how much reliance is placed on such activities in the audit?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. They are very, very important, especially to me, because like with PCI, there are certain controls that you have to be monitoring throughout the year. Let's just take firewall reviews as an example. So you have to have a firewall rule review that gets done, and you have to look through the rules and you have to decide, is this rule still necessary? Is it correct? Does it need to be changed, removed, etc.? But that's one of the key components that we use under PCI is checking to make sure, did you actually do this firewall review audit? And if not, okay, well, why did it not get done? And then that's something that can easily cost you to actually fail PCI assessment if you're not doing something like that. So the internal controls by your security people, your IT people, compliance, privacy, those become so important when actually looking at that, it's not just for PCI. For me, it's for ISO, it's for SOC 2. I'm always very curious what people are doing. I want to see what are the actual audits that your own people are doing. How are they conducting them? You know, are they following best practices, standards, things like that? And then I want to see, okay, you've given me this data, but what did you, as the customer, what did you actually do with this? Did you take this? Did you put tickets in? Did you fix any vulnerabilities? Did you remediate any risk? Or did you just do it to say we did it? And so it really is important to look at the evidence and the artifacts associated with those and validate that, yes, in fact, we are doing them, but also that we're doing something with them. I think both of those are really key to any audit, not just PCI, but that's any framework, in my opinion.
Bob, you got anything you want to add on that one?
Yeah, so a couple things that I've been doing a little bit different. So on audits that, you know, we have a lot of audits that are annual, and they keep coming back and everything else. One of the things that I've been focusing on are for a SOC report is for the risk assessment. One of the things that I've been looking at is, you know, we have recommendations on the letter to management. We have exceptions on the letter to management, and those go to the management of the company and to everybody facilitating the audit. And one of the things I ask is, are you putting any of this into your risk assessment? So if you have a risk assessment and these are identified risks, you know, or recommendations or anything kind of towards a risk, are they making it into the risk assessment and evaluated as a risk? These are things that we can see as auditors, that we can actually ask a question and say, these are the actions that are necessary, you know, to do this. One of the things is a risk assessment. Well, if you're not putting anything or evaluating the letter to management in your risk assessment, then you're really not taking a close look at the actual risks that are there. So that's something that I would look at. Testing is extremely important because you know, if you're doing a SOC, type 1 SOC report is what you're after, there's not a lot of testing there, because that's just a point in time. We just want to make sure it's kind of an inventory of controls. You know, you kind of look at the controls. Yeah, they're there, fine. You know, that's good for a type 1 audit. A type 2 is we need to know that that's been going on over a period of time. And if there is information showing that this hasn't been performed in, you know, 6 months, or, you know, it's only performed periodically, you know, not consistently, something like that, you know, depending on the severity, it could lead to an exception on the report. It's extremely important to be prepared to prove that you're using these controls and that these controls are in place. So the one recommendation I can make is make sure that for the entire period of time, the entire audit period, make sure that you have enough evidence to back up all of your processes, because the auditor will more than likely ask for it.
Yeah, if I can pile on that real quick, the risk assessment is, I'm just going to keep hammering this. It's so important, like Bob was saying here, and you have to understand that the risk assessment is something that drives most of what you do under ISO, and under SOC, it's not optional. You don't just get to say, hey, we didn't feel like doing a risk assessment this time. Well, no, you don't get to do that. It is mandatory to perform that at least annually, and if you don't, that can very easily result in a qualified opinion of your SOC assessment. None of us want that. So I just want to kind of hammer home how important it is. Risk assessment needs to be done. It needs to be done completely across to all organizations, and it needs to be done at least annually with you tracking the risks.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Those are great answers, and I know they're really helpful. So we've got a couple questions that came in that I want to get we'll get your opinion on. And what would you tell a client? So question number 1 is, we're a new organization and we're looking at SOC 2 Type 2 audits. What would be the recommended process, and what are the known pitfalls for a younger organization?
Yeah, I think that the process is going to be, you're going to start with something that's simple, and that's a gap assessment. You want to know, where do I stand up to all of the different SOC controls, and not only where do I stand up with those, which ones have I implemented, But beyond that, which ones can I actually prove that I've implemented over a period of time, whether it's 3 months, 6 months, or 12 months? Because that's one of the keys to Elite SOC 2 is being able to prove that you've done something over a period of time. So if you start out with something like a gap analysis, you can see where you're deficient, and you can see, okay, wait, I've actually got good controls in here, but it also lets you see where do I have the data that I need to be able to prove to me as your auditor that we are actually doing what it is that we're supposed to be doing.
No, that's exactly right. And one of the things that we do offer, we do, obviously our auditors are performing gap assessments all the time for companies. And what we do, what we also do is we help clients, we give them it's available as a type 1 report. So what this does is it actually gives you a regular report like you would get if you had just your normal audit. And it really dives down into each of the controls, and it says what was tested or what wasn't. So it gives you a little bit more information on, one, the control, what it means, and then how you could potentially implement it or what you would need to do. So it really gives you as the, whether you're a compliance leader or IT director, some definite ammunition to go to your boss and say, hey, I need money. I need to upgrade my servers. We're in desperate need of patching. Or you're able to do that. And at the flip side, you're also able to go and look at it and say, wow, we have a lot of these in place and we don't have a lot of gaps to fill. So you can look at it both ways. And when you engage with Kirkpatrick Price to complete your gap analysis and get a SOC 1 report, part of our services, we have a great advisory services team that actually helps you take the recommendations that are given to you by Bob or Steven and really implement that within your systems. And so that's part of our offering. And so just want to throw that out there. It doesn't have to be scary, but there is some unknowns. So really, you're really opening the door to what those unknowns are in your environment, but you're also given tools and recommendations on how to fix that. So just want to give a shout out to our advisory services team, our gappers, all of our auditors who participate in this. This is probably one of the really exciting things that we as an organization get to do is partner with our new clients who have really never experienced an audit. It is hard. It is uncomfortable sometimes, but we really love to partner with you to educate and really work through. I know firsthand the effort and length Bob has gone to work with clients on making sure controls get implemented and working through how that looks. Steven's the same way. And it's, this is something that we really take a lot of pride in as a company to really work with you to help you get to where you need to be from a security standpoint.
And
so Bob, keep going.
Just to kind of add on to that, so the takeaway I'm getting from this question is that you're a new, young organization, so a couple of years old or something like that. So one of the things that I will say is that you have an advantage. That advantage is you can customize your controls now and not develop bad habits, and then have to go through an audit to find out that you have all these bad habits. So the great thing about this, like I said, young organization, new organization, somebody, I think I worked with one that they spun off from a larger organization. So they had they had an opportunity to just recreate everything on the spot. So you have an advantage that other companies don't. That advantage is that you haven't put anything in place, or if it's been in place, hasn't been in place long. And if you are able to talk to one of our gap assessors, or actually I wouldn't even bother with that. I would go and talk to Todd and his team, because they would be able to give you templates for information security policies. They'd be able to give you templates for risk assessments. They'd be able to talk you through a risk assessment. They'd be able to do all these different things and kind of give you the tools to be 100% ready for a SOC report. And not just with us, but with anybody, because these are very much the common, there's a lot of common denominators between, you got to look at certain controls, and there's only a certain number of things that you can look at. So the other thing you can do is also you could do the gap analysis, but if you don't have anything, then it's just going to be everything. So I would just say that it might be better just to go to Todd and his team and get everything set up. But you have an advantage, and I would strike while the iron's hot, because the further down the road you get, the more things that you put in place, that's going to be auditable. And if it's not right, then it's going to be kind of painful to remediate.
Yeah, and just one pitfall I think we've experienced is when you're a smaller company, like maybe a startup, and you're growing like exponentially, you don't have a lot of time to dedicate to the time an audit takes. And so to do your gap, work with a gap auditor, find that work with advisory services the pitfall is you're overwhelmed and you're doing the job of 5 different IT people. You're managing all the incidents, you're making sure production's up and running. You are the SDLC, you are app support, you are all of those things, right? And then here comes an audit, and that makes it difficult to have time. So the biggest pitfall we've seen over and over is not enough time or support. And so just want to like call that out as a pitfall. All right, so we're kind of getting close to our time. I do want to I have one final question. And this is coming into, so this question is, and I want both of you to answer it, and we'll just kind of do a, Stephen, you give me your answer, Bob, give me your answer. Stephen, what trainings or certifications would you recommend for someone early into their compliance career?
Yeah, I'd say there's probably 2 main ones you should focus on. The first one's going to be the CISSP, because that'll get you on the security side. And I'd say the second would probably be the CISA, because that'll get you on the audit side. If you want to focus on privacy, there's also, I believe it's called the CIPP, Certified Information Privacy Professional, is another good one. But I think there's really a couple of those main ones there that kind of gets your foot in the door, and it gives you the understanding of what it is that goes on inside of the auditing circle.
Bob?
Yeah, so I would say that Stephen's answer is very good for someone coming that wants to kind of get into what we're doing on our side here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna kind of read this as what do we like to see on the other side? And one of the biggest things that is compliance, risk and compliance. So we talked about risk. They have a certification. ISAC has a certification called CRISC, CRISC, which is certified in risk. Yeah. Anyways, it's a risk certification. I can just tell you that. I don't know what.
I bet you could ask ChatGPT what that meant.
Yeah. Yeah, we probably could. I don't know if it'd be right though. But anyways,
that would be a wrong answer.
That's definitely one that I would want to see, but that does not cover any of the technical stuff. So I think that if I were to go with the technical certification, I think the CISSP is probably the best one. It's more the most rounded, and the CISA is very much about auditing. So you know, it's got some technical stuff in there, but mostly about. So okay.
Awesome. All right. So we just want to thank everybody. I want to give a huge thank you to Bob and Stephen for taking time out of their day. They're on my team and they're awesome auditors. So if you ever have an opportunity to work with them, you're in great hands. But as a reminder, you're going to receive a recording of this webinar. So please be on the lookout for that in your inbox tomorrow. At KP, our auditors have extensive experience and expertise and are really ready and willing to help you on your journey. For those of you who have any follow-up questions or you want to know more about our service offerings, please reach out to hello@kirkpatrickprice.com and one of our security experts will be in touch. And again, I just really want to thank everyone for joining us today. And if you'd like to see Bob, Stephen, and I back, you know, also email. We will be back with more questions. But we just really want to thank you and have a great day.
Everybody have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.